and I'll hand it off to Joelle here in a second. But first, I will. It is my pleasure to introduce my colleague. Joelle has 20 years of teaching experience, several of which were spent in a classical school here in Pennsylvania. And at that classical school, she developed a lot of the logic and rhetoric curriculum that the school used. And she's co-authored 2 logic books. Many of you are perhaps familiar with them: The Art of Argument, An Introduction to Informal Fallacies, and The Discovery of Deduction, An Introduction to Formal Logic. I'll make sure that you guys have links to check out and access both of those books by the time we're done today. Classical Academic Press did publish both of those books. Joelle continues to support various editorial projects at CAP. Our primary focus now is on supporting the growth and development of our company and School A Academy. And she currently serves as a vice president of operations, sales, and marketing for us at Classical Academic Press. But her heart and soul continues to remain with the subject of logic, as you will soon see. So, Joelle, thank you so much for being with us today, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Joe. This is so much fun. I'm so thrilled to be able to do this again. I did one last year, and it was such a delight. Last year, we did a talk. I did a talk that was really more about the sort of writing and logic into rhetoric, sort of what that trajectory can kind of look like with cap text and how they all sort of fit together and everything. So it was much more curriculum based. And as Joe said today, I'm going to, this is going to be a little bit more philosophical. But before I start on logic, I wanted to just share with everybody a book that I'm reading, and I can't put it down. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. It's by Carl Trueman, who's a professor at Grove City College. It is, I mean, if you're looking for a book that's kind of really dialed into some of the issues that are facing us right now as a culture, it is spot on. I'm just thrilled to read it. We were, I think it was last week, all the weeks sort of blur together. We were at the SCL conference in Charleston, South Carolina, and just sort of debating, not debating, but more discussing what book could maybe the Alcuins be reading for their retreat that comes up later in the fall. And this book came up, and I quickly put it in my Amazon cart, and it was waiting for me when I got home, and I've just been really enjoying it. So anyway, so that's a great book. Has nothing to do with the talk that I'm giving today, but I just wanted to make sure that I shared it. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and it's by Carl Trueman. So I'll jump in now, but to the conversation that I was going to be talking about today. And before I do that, I wanted to say that my talk today is really kind of being pulled from 3 books that I've been reading quite a bit of this summer. And so I'm going to share those with you now as well. The first one is called Reading Augustine on Education, Formation, Citizenship, and the Lost Purpose of Learning. So it's called Reading Augustine, and it's by Joseph Clare. This book, as you can see, not terribly big. This one, oh gosh, there was a quote in here that just stopped me dead in my tracks when I was reading it. I have a couple of other quotes by Clare in my talk, but there's this one here. If you get the book, it's on pages, at the bottom of page 86 and 87, and he writes, "We only learn to speak by the words we receive, and these stories give us our deepest sense of human and political purpose. Who gets to narrate the world? Who gets to narrate the world? The answer to that question," Augustine says, "is the educators." As soon as I got there, who gets to narrate the world? The educators do. He said the task of a Christian educator then is to bring all of the stories of human civilization into fruitful and critical dialogue with Scripture. And I just, wow, it just resonated with me, that weight of responsibility that we have as educators, as Christian educators, because who gets to narrate the world? We do, through the reading that we give to our kids and how we shape them with the stories that we give them. Anyway, this is a fantastic book. I've got several quotes that will be coming from this. Again, that's Reading Augustine by Joseph Clare. The second one, Joseph Clare, I should also note, he is the director of the William Penn Honors Program and Associate Dean for the Liberal Arts at George Fox University. He's a young guy. He's still alive. So you could maybe even get in touch with him and invite him to speak or something if that was something you'd enjoy. This next book, though, the Didascalicon of Hugh of St Victor, not alive. Hugh, gone long time ago. He lived during the Middle Ages. But so yeah, this one, and this, if you're not familiar with this, I had to do a double take when I first saw the title of this book. It is the Didascalicon, and it's by Hugh of St Victor, and it is a medieval guide to the arts. And I do pull several quotes from the Didascalicon as well. So I just wanted you to know that that's coming. And lastly, before I get started, this is an anthology, which is fantastic. If you don't have a copy of this on your shelf, you really should. It's The Great Tradition, classic readings on what it means to be an educated human being, and it's edited by Richard Gamble. So The Great Tradition, edited by Richard Gamble, another fantastic book. This one, I mean, he's got everyone in here from Plato through, all the way up through the 20th century, some different 20th century writers. Dorothy Sayers is in here, and Lewis, some of the more contemporary folks. But, going back to, our early church fathers and so forth, it's just a fantastic resource to have on your shelf. So a lot of my quotes are going to come from those 3 books, and I just wanted to let you know that that's where those were coming from, because that's always a big question I feel like everybody has when someone does a webinar and they start rattling off quotes and you don't know where they're coming from. So I'll go ahead and share my screen because I have a presentation for you. So make sure that that's coming through. Can everybody see Logic, Queen of the Sciences? Are we good, Joe? Can you see what I'm sharing? Okay, very good. All right, so a couple of things. I loved this quote. This quote came out of something else that I was reading, but I didn't read the entire piece of. But I loved it. But something I should note about the word sciences, it's only been in our sort of modern our modern vernacular that we separate arts and sciences from one another. Prior to the end of the Middle Ages, when people talked about sciences or they talked about arts, they used these terms interchangeably. So this session could have just as easily been titled Logic, Queen of the Sciences instead of Logic, Queen of the Logic, Queen of the Arts instead of Logic, Queen of the Sciences. They really could go back and forth. In fact, logic is both an art and a science. We say that logic is the art and science of reasoning. So it is a both and pieces. And again, it's only since we started thinking of things in terms of sciences and arts, or mathematics and arts as being separate, that we had to sort of make this distinction. But Logic, Queen of the Sciences, or Queen of the Arts, is what we're going to be talking about today. And this is going to be a little bit more of a philosophical survey of logic and its relationship to wisdom and to knowledge within the liberal arts and into who God made us to be. And that, of course, is the whole purpose of what we're doing, and especially to make sure that we are equipping ourselves and our kids to be able to engage in the world around us. So here we go. There's this quote from Hugh of St Victor. The quote is, "Always learning, but never reaching knowledge. Always learning, but never reaching knowledge." This was one of those quotes that, as I was reading through the Didascalicon, another one that sort of stopped me in my tracks, because isn't that so true? That's exactly how it kind of seems in a lot of ways. For the world, for us as Christian educators in many ways, but it's that idea that we've never lived in a place or in a space where we could have more information accessible to us and so readily at a given moment. I mean, there's Google, there's a YouTube channel for everything. You can learn master's class content, from masterclass. You can do teacher training through Classical U. I mean, there's just no shortage of ways that we can just consume information. But there's this idea that we could be always learning, but never reaching knowledge. And so it sort of begs the question, what is knowledge? Where do we find it? What is it? How is it different than just being informed? And that's one of the questions here, because being informed, I think we hear that phrase quite a lot. that doesn't necessarily help us make wise choices, prudent choices, navigate with wisdom through the world around us, just being informed. But there's those other virtues really do help us. And so this is part of what I think we're really kind of getting at here. So what do we pursue? And I was looking here at Proverbs. I've been reading through Proverbs every day. That there's 31, so I usually go through as part of my daily devotions. I kind of go through Proverbs, and Proverbs 2, 1 through 15. He writes, "If you accept my words, and if you indeed cry out for insight, and if you seek it," which he's referring to understanding, "like silver, and search for it like his hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Prudence will watch over you, and understanding will guard you." And you notice I've bolded and I've colored some things. And what I've bolded here are, the first three bolds here are the ifs. If you do this, and if you do this, and if you do that. He's really talking, we've got some work to do here. It's not, these things don't just come to us. There's work that we have to do. There's a responsibility on our end. And then if we do these things, then there's a cause and effect relationship. Then you will have this. And then the for that comes afterwards, these are the reasons, right? If you've studied logic, you know that you need to have premises or reasons for what you're saying. And here he's saying for or because, right? Here's a reason: because the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. So that's how we will get the understanding of the fear of the Lord and finding the knowledge of God. And as a result of that, we will understand. And then there's another for or another because wisdom will come into your heart and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. And we don't usually break down Proverbs in this way, but there's a demonstration here of action and responsibility on our end, commitment and faithfulness from the Lord. And then there's a lot of these terms in here that all relate to wisdom, knowledge, understanding, prudence, justice, equity. And there's something common about all of them, and it really, they all interlock and connect with one another. And if we're really talking about, well, what do our kids need to navigate through this wild world that we're living in right now? This is what we need. We need wisdom, knowledge, understanding, righteousness, justice, equity, and so forth, prudence, understanding. We need the fear of the Lord as well. So why we pursue knowledge, and this is a quote from Joseph Clare. He says, "We must form students who have knowledge and technical mastery over the world while simultaneously training them in what to do and who to serve with that knowledge." So if we're going to pursue knowledge, that's great, but for what purpose? And he says it's so that we can train them in what to do and who to serve with that knowledge. And that really is this next question: what should we do and who should we serve? And again, this comes pretty easily. Clare is clear about this. The greatest commandments, we've got two of them, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I've got two things highlighted here. One is this idea of love, and one is this idea of, our mind. There's lots of ways that we need to love, that he's saying heart, soul, and strength being three of the four, but mind is one of them. We are to love the Lord our God with all of our mind, and then we love neighbors as ourselves. So the ordering of our loves, if you've been in classical education circles for a while, or if not, this quote from Augustine from City of God is one of the ones that's about ordering our loves. He says, "It seems to me that a brief and true definition of virtue is rightly ordered love." So if we're trying to seek those virtues of prudence and wisdom and equity and justice and self-control, then how do we do that? It's through the right ordering of our loves. And then I'm going to pair that quote from Augustine with this Joseph Clare quote as well. And he writes that liberal arts education is not only a temporal good of its own, but also a process through which one learns to recognize the hierarchical order of the value in the world. It requires that one orders one's mind and affections so that she can recognize the order of reality. So, we're going to need to unpack a little bit how to order our loves. But he's also suggesting that the liberal arts, right, a liberal arts education is one of the ways that we can order our loves, and we can bring the ordering of that love of our mind into the right shape, right? It's about forming and shaping our loves. And the liberal arts can be one of the ways that we do that. So let's unpack both of those a little bit. The first one is, what does properly ordered love in the context of a liberal arts education look like? Well, first, let's look at what are the liberal arts. This is from Seneca on liberal and vocational studies. And you can find this quote among other things that Seneca wrote in that the Great Tradition book that I referenced. He writes, hence, you see why liberal studies are so called. It's because they are studies worth of freeborn gentlemen, but there is only one real liberal study, and it's that which gives man his liberty. It is the study of wisdom, and that is lofty, brave, and great-souled. And he says all the other studies are puny if we're, aside from the study of wisdom. And so liberal arts are intended to make us free. They are for the free person, but they are intended to make us free. And we think of freedom as something that, sort of born with. Yes, yet we find ourselves enslaved in many ways because we don't know how to break out of thinking, break out of ways of living, and a free mind, one that is ordered in the love of the Lord towards wisdom, gives us freedom, because in wisdom comes a free life in many ways. So the question here is being asked from Joseph Clare. And so I'm going to ask this question again. Let's think about it now that we have a sense for what liberal arts education looks like. A liberal arts education is a kind of education that is going to be nurturing and guiding us towards wisdom. There are three ways that we can think of ordering our loves. And Clare talks about these three. The first one is the inward ordering of the individual soul, right? As one acquires the moral and intellectual virtues for his disciplined study. So there's an ordering of within. And then there's the upward ordering of love for God, which is a fulfillment of the commandment to love God with one's whole mind. And then there's the outward ordering of affection for other human beings and one's sense of ethical responsibility. And so you get this sense, and this is sort of a theme with Augustine, with regard to education, with regard to reading, with regard to thinking, with regard to awakening sort of the soul of the self in many ways. It's this in, up, and out, repeatedly, in, up, and out, this attention, this ordering, this shaping of rightly ordered affections and love, and shaping of the mind both inwardly up to God and then out to one another. And it becomes something that really embodies the two greatest commandments then in many ways, because if we're tending to ourselves and we're tending to God and tending to others, then we really are, we really do have all of the view in mind. So we have to be able to do this well, right? If we're going to, again, be seeking wisdom for the purposes of having understanding and engaging in the world around us, the liberal arts can be a tool, and it provides us with these virtues for disciplined study of the self, of the mind, and of our ethical responsibility. So to love God with our mind is this pursuit of knowledge. And then Hugh of St Victor's, the Didascalicon, he talks about, so we've got several ways to pursue knowledge. He says that there's study or instruction, there's meditation, there's prayer, there's performance, and there's contemplation. Now, the one that the liberal arts can help with is that first one, with study and instruction. That's not to say that there's no way for the liberal arts to be a part of your meditative process or your prayer process or performance or contemplation. And in fact, this should be something that's always happening just in continuous cyclical performance, that you are introduced to something and studying it and you're meditating on it, then you're praying it through, then you're performing it out, and you're thinking, you're deeply contemplating these things, and it's sort of like an all-encompassing cycle of what it is that it is to the ways to pursue knowledge. But regarding the study and instruction, Hugh is very, very clear about the things necessary for study and instruction. And he says that there's work required. And if you look back at Proverbs, there's that whole list of ifs. If we do this, and if we do that, and if we do this other thing, there's always work that comes for study. But then there's a method to that work. And now we're getting a little bit closer to what the role of logic and why she is the queen of the sciences, right? Because she is going to be one of the methods that we can use for study and instruction for the pursuit of knowledge, so that we can be ordering our minds, so that we can be moving towards wisdom and engaging with the world around us. And so you can see that logic is not outside of any of these things. It's sort of nested at the beginning and on the interior of the idea of study and instruction and knowledge and the liberal arts, and the shaping of one's loves and cultivating wisdom and so forth. It's right there at the heart of it, and it's the method that makes these other pieces happen, and that's part of what we'll see a little bit more of how it gets interconnected. But method for the work is really what we're going for. So the liberal arts is the 7 liberal arts, and grammar, logic, and rhetoric make up the trivium. There's 3. Those are the 3 of the liberal arts. And if we look at what they are, this also comes from Hugh, that Hugh says that grammar is the knowledge of how to speak without error. Dialectic, or logic, and I should say that just like art and science get interchanged back and forth as similes for one another, so in some of these texts, logic and dialectic is also interchanged back and forth as well. So grammar is the knowledge of how to speak without error. Dialectic is clear-sighted argument, which separates true from false. And then rhetoric is the discipline of persuading every suitable thing. Now, I like all of these definitions. They're quick. They both, all of them sort of require much more unpacking. And there's, whole chapters dedicated in some of these books to grammar, and, separate ones to dialectic. And then, Quintilian and Seneca and Cicero just, they've got tons to say about rhetoric and oratory and that kind of thing. So there's more to dig into with each one of these. But dialectic is clear-sighted argument, which separates true from the false, the true from the false. So let's look a little bit more at logic itself. Hugh writes that logic, though last to be discovered, ought to be first learned. And so he's talking about these principal sciences, or the principal arts from which all of the others descend. And he says that there's the theoretical arts, which help us achieve wisdom. There's the practical arts, which help us achieve justice. There's the mechanical or common arts, which help us achieve need. And he said the logical arts, those are the ones that help us achieve all of the others. And so he then goes on to say, those are the 4, but in these 4 parts of philosophy, such order ought to be preserved. So we ought to do them in this order. He says he would place logic first, ethics second, the theoretical arts third, and the mechanical or common arts fourth. So he's noting that it's sort of the last one that got discovered. It had been for many, many centuries that people thought of grammar and rhetoric and sort of missing that piece of logic that was in there. And then they knew that there was astronomy and astronomy and music and gymnastic and mathematics. But it took a little while for the idea of logic to be a piece that became discovered, and now it rests in many cases at the heart of what it takes to be able to achieve all of these, because we're talking about rightly ordered thinking, so that we can be pursuing truth and separate it from falsehood, so that we can be wise and prudent, and so that then we can act in ways both inward, upward, and outward in ways that we can impact ourselves and our culture in good and right ways. So I hope you're seeing, and that's one of the drawbacks of doing a webinar is I can't see your faces. I can't tell if you're nodding along or if they're just glazed over and you're not following along at all, but I hope you are. But that logic is really this core piece that gives us, it's like the engine. It's that, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, and the only one that's coming to mind is like Iron Man with like the Avengers. That's probably because I just watched that movie with my daughter not too long ago. But there's this core on the inside, right, that's making everything else, giving everything else the energy that it needs to be able to do its job correctly. Another quote that you may have seen at least in part, and this one comes from another quote from the great tradition. It's from Morris. Dialectic, again, he writes dialectic. He also means logic, is the science of understanding which fits us for investigations and definitions, for explanations, and for distinguishing the true from the false. So you can hear that Hugh is sort of echoing him, this idea of true from the false. It is the science of the sciences, or he could have just as easily said, it's the art of the arts. It teaches others. It teaches learning itself. It not only will, but can lead others to knowledge. It teaches us to discover truth and unmask falsehood. It teaches us to draw conclusions. It shows us what is valid in argument and what is not. It teaches us to recognize what is contrary to the nature of things. Therefore, we must understand this excellent art. Notice he flips it from its science of the sciences. Now he's talking about an art, right? Therefore, we must understand this excellent art and constantly reflect upon its laws in order that they may be able keenly to pierce the craftiness of errorists and to refute their fatal fallacies. There's so much in here that we could really just plumb the depths. And the first thing I want you to do as you're reading this quote is to kind of, oh goodness, I hope the dog isn't going to start barking. I'm so sorry. That's one of the drawbacks of being at home. As you're reading over this, please be thinking about where are the places here where we're seeing this and we can apply some of this to like, oh my goodness, this is what we need for today, for what's going on in the world today, for what we're facing as a culture. This is what we need, right? There's so many distinguishing true from the false, that we need that today. To help lead others to knowledge, we need that today. To unmask falsehood, to teach us to recognize what is contrary. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Yeah, to teach us to recognize what is contrary to the nature of things, right? What is the nature of things? What is reality? And we need something that can help us recognize what is contrary to the nature of things. So as you're reading through this, kind of let yourself absorb it and think about and kind of embody it for if I had these things, if I had these tools, how would I better be able to equip my kids and myself to respond to the world today? And then the next thing I want us to do, and this is where I've got the highlighting here, I want us to notice that it's used for distinguishing the truth from the false. Now, there's something about this phrasing, about each one of these. If you were my students, I would ask you sort of what is the underlying assumption for the words that are being chosen here? What's the underlying assumption? If it requires that we have to be able to distinguish truth from false, true from false, what's the assumption? If it requires that it can lead others to knowledge, what's the assumption? If it's saying that logic can help us discover truth, what's the assumption? If it says it can unmask falsehood, what's the assumption? If it can help us draw out conclusions, what's the assumption? Distinguishing, leading, discovering, unmasking, drawing, all of these words assume that the answer is mysterious, unknown. It's a secret in some ways. If we didn't have to distinguish what was true from false, it was just blatantly obvious in every case, and we all saw it the same way, there would be no distinguishing true from false. We just be, right? It would be like the air we breathe. It just is. But there's a recognition here that we have to be able to distinguish things, which means that there might be ambiguity, lack of clarity, difference of opinion. If we have to lead someone to knowledge, ourselves included, but others as well, then that must mean that knowledge isn't always right in front of where they are. They might need a path forward. They might need a way to get there. If there's truth to be discovered, then it means that it might not be readily apparent. If we have to unmask falsehood, it means that there's a masking that needs to be, and we have to recognize that there is a mask and then do the unmasking. And then if we have to draw conclusions, right, then we must need something to help us put these pieces together so that we can get to the conclusion. And what I'm trying to highlight for you here is that these things are not just the way that they are. Sometimes there's work to be done and prudence to be applied to that work. So there's the work, and then there's the method to that work if we're going to go through study and instruction, so that we can get to knowledge, so that we can understand what is true and false, so that we can have wisdom. And that's going to require that we have this method, this readily available method to us that we can actually use. I think what we want is we just want to just sort of know. We get sort of irritated with the world around us. We're like, how can they just not know this is wrong? How can they just not know that this is true? What if they don't have the tools to get there? Even if they have the information, they've been always learning, but never attaining knowledge. There's a difference between being informed and being knowledgeable. And I think we have to really step into and embrace this idea that there's more than just knowing stuff. It's the way we put it together. It's the method that we're using to put it together. And that's where logic becomes not just something that's like great for problem solving and for critical thinking, buzzwords that we all have heard, but they are essential tools. And if we don't give them these essential tools, they're going to be walking around with a whole bunch of information, and we're going to be just hoping that they're going to be making the right decisions as a result. That's a pretty big gamble when there is a method that can accompany us through the liberal arts so that we can be shaping our minds into the right ordering of how we need to order our loves. So I'll go on from there. I hope I didn't beat that horse too long, but I want to focus just a little bit here on this idea of mysteries and secrets, because all of those passages we read were talking about the idea that there might be something that we need to discover in mysteries and secrets that there are. And I just love this very, very short poem. This is it from Robert Frost. It's called The Secret Sits. And it says, we dance around a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows. And it's this idea that there is a truth to things. There is the way that things have been created and designed and ordered in the world. They are static. And man tries, and we dance around and try to put our best effort into with our information, with the methods that we have, to being unlocking the secrets that sit there in the middle. They don't change. The secrets of the universe, that the universe is set in motion. It continues to just unfold as it's going to unfold, and the various parts of the universe. I'm thinking of solar systems and galaxies and gaseous substances and all kinds of stuff. And we make speculations, we learn, we try to apply our minds to it, but it's not confused about what it is. It's not only as developed as we understand it to be, it exceeds us in what it is, or it exceeds our ability to know it. What it is, the fullness of what the universe is not reliant upon our ability to understand it. These secrets, the truth of things, whatever they are, they sit as static and finished. They have an end to them. and we do our best to understand them. And these mysteries and secrets that we were talking about over here, the distinguishing that needs to happen, the leading, the discovering, the unmasking, the drawing, these are all things that sit as secrets, and we need tools to be able to adequately or better or get closer to understanding what these secrets are. So the mysteries and secrets can be revealed through reason. So Hugh of St Victor says it this way: we investigate with our reason. Now, every finite or defined matter is better known and able to be grasped by knowledge. Teaching, moreover, begins with those things that are better known, and by acquainting us with those works in ways in way to matters which lie hidden. Those things that lie hidden, those are the secrets, those are the mysteries that we are trying to use our knowledge to understand and to discover. He goes on to say, furthermore, we investigate those things with our reason, which is the proper function of which is to analyze. He says, when by analysis and investigation of the natures of individual things, we descend from universals into particulars. So this is, part of a larger quotation, but there's a couple of pieces that I want to sort of pull out, and that is that we become better able to know and to grasp knowledge when we investigate with our reason, right? And it's to know and to investigate. We wouldn't have to investigate if things were just obvious. We have to investigate the matters which lie hidden, to those mysteries and secrets. And reason is that tool. Logic is that tool. So unlocking the mysteries and learning the secrets, we come through the words, right? When we bump into these ideas, we come through the words to a concept, and through the concept, we come to a thing. And through the thing, we come to its idea. And through the idea, we arrive at truth. And what Hugh is kind of suggesting here in this short passage is, he's sort of outlining for us what we would in logic call the three acts of the mind: the simple apprehension, the judgment, and the inference. First, we conceptualize something, and then we name it with a thing. And then it becomes part of a bigger idea where we're relating it in judgment to other things. And then we take those judgments and we start to build towards inference. And what Hugh is talking about with the three acts of the mind really help us understand in our common vernacular is that inductive and deductive reasonings are the basic building blocks that we use to build understanding of the things that are unknown, to discern what is true, and to unmask falsehood. This is what it means to learn to reason. And this is the tool, this is the method that logic gives us to help us learn to reason in these ways. So it's these three acts of the mind. And if you were in one of my logic classes and I was introducing the concept of the three acts of the mind, this idea of simple apprehension, which is naming a concept as a thing, right? Applying a word to it, and then connecting that thing to other things by forming an idea, and then arriving at some true conclusion or some truth, which is an inference that you're making about lots of ideas being connected together. If you were in one of my logic classes and we were talking about this, we would talk about the fact that you do this instinctively, that you are always categorizing, putting things into buckets, making sense of the world around you. Only on the rarest of occasions would you ever find like your car keys in the refrigerator, because those two things don't go together, right? You know where to get the water. You don't walk to with your water glass over to the doorknob and then stand there puzzled as to why water doesn't come out of the doorknob. You have over time, all of this is part of what we have been given in our ability to reason, which separates us from all other living things, is that these three acts of the mind are constantly happening. They're constantly working. That if you can make sense of the world around you and you can live in this world, you are doing these three things. The point is that you want to do them intentionally and with purpose. You want to train yourself in these ways. You don't just want to be someone who does the best that they can. You want to learn the skills, the methods that help you actually achieve good reason. In some of my rhetoric classes over the years, by the time students would get to my class in, 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, some of them would sit there and they would say things, kind of like, well, I've been writing papers for a really long time. And yes, they've been writing papers since the 3rd grade when, students for the very first time start writing paragraphs and then essays, and they write, their 3-point paragraphs and then their 5-point paragraph essays, and they get to me in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And we talk about the fact that they're really, really good by 10th grade. They are really, really good at writing 3rd grade papers. They've been doing it for 7 years, and they have mastered writing the 3-point paragraph and the 5-paragraph essay. But do we want them to learn how to write as an adult? Do we want them to learn how to think as an adult? Do we want them to be intentional about that? Everyone has a rhetorical fingerprint. How much do you want to say about what your rhetorical fingerprint is? Every single one of us has a logical fingerprint. We are all using reason, but are you maximizing it? Do you know how to use it as well as you can? Do you want to be in control of the reasoning that you have and always growing in that? Or are you satisfied that you can get along pretty well without the training? This is where logic really comes into play for us. It's about being intentional and recognizing that reason is an area that we need to grow in. So what makes reasoning possible? It is our ability to distinguish truth from falsehood. So in our world today, we hear cries for justice, cries for equality, cries for, right choices. But the question we have to ask is, whose justice? Whose equality? Whose righteousness? We make our choices by determining what is true, and those determinations rely on our ability to use logic and to employ the reason in the pursuit of wisdom towards what the telos really is. The whole point is to attain wisdom, God's wisdom. So this is one of those tools. Going back to the verse from Proverbs, we can see here that then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God, for the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. Then you will understand righteousness, justice, and equity. These are the things that the world is crying out for right now. They want righteousness, they want justice, they want equity, and every good path. Wisdom is the way. Knowledge in pursuit of wisdom, reasoning as the tool to help us acquiring knowledge to acquire wisdom is the way to the virtues of being able to live in a way that is ordered both for ourselves, up to God, and then out to others and serve each other well. This is my final quote here is from Robert de Sorbonne. He's from Paris College. And he writes that the sword of God's word is forged by grammar, sharpened by logic, and burnished by rhetoric, but only theology can use it. I just thought that was sort of a lovely way to sort of end this idea that logic is the queen of the sciences, it's the queen of the arts, it's this interior piece that makes all of these other pieces happen together, but her end, right, her perfect end, that not the end meaning terminus, but end meaning sort of perfection, is only in whether or not she leads us to a right understanding of ordering our loves both interior, up to God, and out to others, so that we can serve others and live in a world where we have equity, truth, justice, prudence, and so forth. So I will stop my share at this point, and be happy to sort of talk and take some questions if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Joelle.
Sure.
I'm bringing up the Q&A box right now. We have a few. Like she said, please feel free to submit a couple more questions as we continue into our time of Q&A. One I'll start out with was from Alicia, who asks, would you equip someone with a strong ethical foundation with logical tools? I would think ethics first, then logic. Do you want to comment a little bit on the kind of the tapestry between ethics and logic, the relationship between the two?
Sure. So ethics is, he's talking, I think we might be just equivocating on the term. That the phrasing in there was more thinking in terms of political or persuasive speeches and ethical persuasion in the thinking of like an orator. So I think you're probably thinking of rooting and grounding in like morality and having a right understanding of right and wrong and how to treat others and those kinds of things that go into ethics. But the way that they were talking about it is you really ought not be sort of prognosticating or, speaking broadly and, that kind of thing, and making big speeches and be trying to be persuasive until and notice that grammar comes first. There's a lot of reading that comes with it, right? Logic helps us make sense of the reading to discern truth from falsehood so that we have good knowledge and understanding. And then we can go and speak into, with our ethos intact, to a broader audience in terms of political oratory, speeches, that kind of thing. So I think that we may have just been a little bit of equivocation there about what he meant by ethics, but logic would come first, then ethics, and then theology, obviously, a little bit further down the line, and then the common arts as well, the common or mechanical arts.
Thank you. Here's a great question we just got. I think you're going to have fun answering this one. How can a parent teach logic to kids at a young age? Are there any curriculum or classes you recommend? And maybe just for the sake of the exercise, we'll say the grammar stage, meaning grades 3 through 6, and maybe you even want to comment on before grade 3, but
sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
The best classroom for kids that are young is fantastic, lively, dynamic conversations with their family. Kids do not need a workbook when they are very, very young to experience the world around them and to ask tons of questions and to be starting to engage and make sense of the world. There is, I don't usually reference this podcast because I don't necessarily agree with everything that they put out, but there's a podcast out called by This American Life. Again, if you've listened to it, there's going to be lots of things that I would say not worth your time. But one of the episodes on This American Life is called Kid Logic. And I have had so much fun listening to this episode of This American Life called Kid Logic. Kids are always trying to make sense of the world around them. And if you spend any time with a child, you will find that they are trying to unpack and resolve and make sense of the world around them in so many fun ways. It is a real hoot to engage with kids. And this particular podcast really highlights some stories of adults sort of retelling either experiences that they have with kids or remembering things that they did when they were children. It's really a fun one. But the best classroom for kids is great, dynamic, lively, and regular conversations with their family and friends. Now, when the kids get a little bit older, well, and I should also say that along that time and all the way up through when it's time to actually start taking logic, they need to be building their well-stocked mind. Because you can't really engage in logic unless you have something to talk about. And what we very often find when kids get to our 7th grade logic class, if they're not well read, if they haven't had good conversations with their families, if they don't know what's going on in the world, when they get to logic class, then they don't know, they don't have anything to talk about. They don't have a context for the world around them. It's so important that kids have a well-stocked mind. And it's not just about books, although that's a huge piece of it for sure, but it's about being in conversation. Remember, when it's time for logic, it's because it's in dialectic, right? There's a dialogue that's going on, and they have to be able to talk about things. So yes, there's the well-stocked mind, lots of great conversations. When they get a little bit older, that reasoning and reading series that CAP doesn't publish, but we sell, is a great starting tools to help them start to make sense of and making connections in language, which is a really great place to start. Grammar and Latin are also fantastic places. They don't have a direct tie for logic, but for a preparation for logic, except that they help students learn to make order and to put things in order and to make sense of things in some really important ways. So some of those things can be done with kids that are not quite ready for a logic class. We usually suggest that logic starts formally in the 7th grade, and we've taken the art and science of reasoning, we've taken logic and we've broken it into its informal, inductive side and separated it from its formal deductive side. So we separated into the art of argument and the discovery of deduction. And in the 7th grade, we say, if they're well read, if they've got a well-stocked mind, then they're ready to start working on these inductive, informal fallacies and learning bad arguments and good arguments through the art of argument. And then usually in the 8th grade, we say that the students are usually ready to start reasoning in the abstract with the discovery of deduction. I was just emailing a colleague about this a couple of days ago. For the discovery of deduction, because it does require reasoning in the abstract, one of the things, there's no math in the discovery of deduction, but we usually say that if a student has successfully completed a course in pre-algebra, that they would be ready to begin reasoning in the abstract, and they'd be ready to start taking a course like the discovery of deduction. So lots of great things you can do just in the world around you. I would say as a parent, don't be afraid of any conversation that comes up. Have fun with it. You will be surprised to hear how your kids are trying to reason through things, even very, very young. Help them flex those muscles, and instead of giving them answers, ask them to kind of reason through things sometimes, so that when they're older, they're used to kind of mapping out how to navigate through tough situations and that kind of thing.
Kind of shifting from kids and young learners to adults, Jennifer asked the question, what books and classes would you recommend for parents who are new to logic? And one I'm sure you'll mention is our Classical U course on logic, and I'll share a little bit more on that later. But yeah, would you like to expand on that?
Sure.
What would parents study?
That's a really good question. So one of the places too for it's very similar is you've got to have some instruction, but then you've also got to have a well-stocked mind. And most parents, if they're reading, that's fantastic. But I've got to say that one of the ways, and this happens with everybody, I think it's probably safe to say that you're always better able to find a bad argument if it's one that you disagree with than to find a bad argument in one that you do agree with. Right? If you agree with the conclusion, sometimes you just, we like the answer so much that we just can't even bring ourselves to criticize the reasoning behind the answer. But if you listen to arguments that you disagree with, you will spot the bad arguments all over the place. So one of the things that I know, it sort of sounds a little bit counterintuitive, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend to do this with kids without a parent's guidance or a good teacher's guidance, but it's to listen to podcasts, read articles, read people that are just going to, infuriate you and, make you mad, and try to find the bad reasoning that is in them, and then pair that with the instruction that you're getting, because you'll start to see it more readily if you already disagree than if you agree with the conclusions that are being drawn. So don't be afraid of listening to that radio program that you disagree with, listening to the commentator that really bugs you, reading the op-ed article that is just gonna bother you or whatever. Do that, because that's where you'll get to see more of the fallacies coming out and some of the bad arguments. As far as how to prepare yourself, Joe's absolutely right. The two courses that we have on Classical U, one of them gets you through the art of argument, and one of them gets you through the discovery of deduction. It is not uncommon for adults to go through those books. So, if you're really looking for introduction and you're going to get it, yes, some of the examples and things are a little bit silly, but a lot of it is right on where an adult would be fine to do it, and it would certainly glean what you need to glean. If you're looking for like the next step up beyond those two textbooks and the Classical U course, Peter Kraft, that's Kreeft, his book, Socratic Logic, is a good book to use. I've taught that book at the college level for an introductory logic class. And it's going to go from the kinds of things that are just very applicable to the world around you, and then but he does get into some more symbolic things, some more propositional logic, some more some things that you will probably be thinking, I'm not exactly sure that this is going to be immediately applicable to the world around me. So you might have to kind of pick and choose a little bit more if you're going with something like a Kraft book. But certainly the beginning of that book, for I think maybe the first 9 chapters, maybe 10 chapters, would be things that you could very easily apply to the world around you if you're looking for sort of like that next level beyond the textbooks that we've published. It is not uncommon for folks to start with the CAP textbooks and then move into the next one feeling like they have an even better foundation for being able to understand something like a Kraft text. So.
Thank you for sharing. I just shared a link to that Classical U course finder where you can do a little bit more digging on our logic courses. The informal fallacies, essentials of formal logic, and teaching formal logic are all on Classical U. And if you visit the course finder and click on math and logic, they'll all pop up right there for you, and you can watch free previews of all of those courses. All right, moving on a little bit to the nuts and bolts of discovery of deduction. We have a question from Jennifer asking if you could just provide a synopsis of the discovery of deduction course. And then kind of taking the next step from that, Amelia asks, what would you recommend for students who complete the discovery of deduction and are interested in more advanced logic topics?
Sure.
So could you talk about the discovery of deduction a little bit, and then what comes after that?
Yeah. That's a great question. So the discovery of deduction, remember, it's the deductive formal side of logic. And you'll hear me say this a lot, that when we talk about formal and informal, a lot of folks, we think in terms of, informal being like the jeans and t-shirt version of logic. And then somehow formal is like the really kind of button up, stodgy, serious kind of logic. And that you have to be like a certain kind of student to be able to take formal logic, like, oh, my kid loves informal logic, but formal logic, we don't want to do that because my kid's not good at math or something like that. It really has nothing to do with that. We're still at the point, at least in the discovery of deduction, where formal logic is really just the other half of introductory logic. And you really do need to take, both the art and the science of it. The discovery of deduction, it walks students through this idea of the 3 acts of the mind. So if we're going to start with terms, we have to understand how to define our terms correctly. We have to be precise with our language, that there needs to be care with use of vocabulary. I mean, I was just in the car with my daughter yesterday driving, she's 13, and we were driving along and she was using thing and stuff and, that kind of, and I was like, stop, use words. What are you talking about? Name the thing that you're trying to say. I don't know what you're talking about anymore. We have to learn to be precise with our language. And too often we let our students get away with sloppy language where we don't require that kind of precision from them. And that kind of behavior sort of fosters bad thinking. So that's the first and the foundational element. My daughter's standing right over here with her hands on her hips because she just heard me use her as an example. But we begin with this idea of starting to name our what it is that we're talking about with some specificity and intentionality. From then, we want to learn how to craft accurate statements. We want to know how one term relates to other things in that judgment sphere. We want to relate one term to other things in the category that it belongs to. And then we want to be able to make judgments about that. Is it true or false that all of something is a particular way, or is it some of something is a certain way, that none of it is that way? And from there, we want to start building those true premises, those true foundational pieces, and learning to build new knowledge. We want to be able to make inferences and draw conclusions. And so and of course, we want to do that with validity. We want our arguments to be valid. In some ways, it's not in some ways, this is true. If you have true premises, and if the construction of your argument is valid, it is a guarantee with certainty that you will end up with a true conclusion. You cannot end up with anything other than a true conclusion. If your premises are true, and if the construction and the architecture of your argument is valid, strong, it is a guarantee with certainty that you will always end up with a true conclusion. It's impossible for it to be otherwise. That kind of thinking, that kind of ordered thinking is essential for someone who is trying to build an argument. It is the foundational nugget of when we say, hey, kids, take a thesis statement. Is that your conclusion? Build me an outline that builds towards that conclusion. It really ought to be that there's a syllogism at the heart of every persuasive paper where there are true premises that line up in an ordered fashion to lead to that true conclusion. Now, there's rhetoric that goes along with that, and we have to learn how to be eloquent. We have to learn how to be fair to our opponents and think about counter arguments and all sorts of other things. But the discovery of deduction is really part of the linguistic process that makes you ready to be able to build persuasive arguments. And the whole point of being persuasive, of course, is to take someone who disagrees with you and give them a path so that they can come to a right understanding of what it is that you're talking about. And the only way that you do that is that by, obviously, you're not persuasive if you build a great argument, but nobody is convinced. You have to learn how to be persuasive, and that's where rhetoric comes in. Now, as far as next levels of logic, you want to be, students will be getting into propositional logic. Propositional logic is where we're taking sort of the sentences, the statements that we've been building and the conclusions that we've been drawing in in regular sentences, and in our case, English. And then we're going to be changing those into symbols so that the content really isn't the focus anymore. Rather, it's all about the construction. And construction is where we get into propositional logic, and that's kind of, we move away from syllogisms. So anything that's moving towards symbolic logic is really what would come after the discovery of deduction. Dr. David Schenk and I have been talking probably for going on 10 years now about writing a follow-up to the discovery of deduction. We just haven't had time for it yet, but I'm hoping that we can at some point, sometime in the future. But that's where you would head next after a course in deductive logic. And the Kraft book would probably have some good places for you to start. That would be some of those last chapters that you might not find readily applicable to the world around you, but would definitely be moving from syllogistic logic into more symbolic logic.
Awesome. All right, we're going to try to blaze through a few more questions here. We'll wrap up around 3:15. These next two, Joelle, are more specific to logic in the classroom. I'd love if you could answer both because I think they're great questions. Jennifer asked the first one. She says she teaches 7th grade English in the public school where the students have zero experience to the trivium. What are your suggestions to integrate some logic lessons into the class? She's used some rhetoric and reasoning last year, but she would love to bring in logic right away. How can you ease students in a non-trivium setting without too much confusion?
That's a great question. So I used to give a talk pre-COVID when I was going to a lot more conferences, and I was sitting in those big seminar rooms with parents, and the whole thing was about more logic than you think you do. And I just went through it and showed them example after example after example of where they would be able to identify really bad reasoning. They just didn't have the words for it. They just did not have the vocabulary for it. The parents knew as they were sitting there, they're like, and I would ask them, so like we just, it was on a big screen, and I'd say, so, we just read this, short statement here or whatever. You don't have to know the fallacy that it's called. Just tell me where it goes wrong. And parents from all over the audience, they'd raise their hand and then they'd say, I don't know what to say, what the word is for it, but this is what seems like it's wrong. And they were absolutely right. They're spot on, absolutely right. You don't need to have a trivium background. You don't need to have, you don't need to be steeped in the liberal arts to recognize where there's bad reasoning. But if the instructor knows the fallacies that she wants to pull out from her students, it's very easy then for when those times come up in classes for you to say, ask the students the exact same thing. What's wrong with the thinking here? Even if it's in a piece of fiction literature that you're reading. I mean, if you think about it, every climax, every rising action, it's all based on bad decisions, poor decisions, lies, myths, truths, equivocations, innuendo, whatever it is. There's always some sort of conundrum that sort of happens. It's built on mob appeal fallacies and, oversimplifying and overgeneralizing and all kinds of straw man fallacies. So even if it's a literature class, you can ask them, what fallacy did the author include here to set this scene up so that there would be this great big misunderstanding? In history, when you're kind of unpacking a situation and you're looking for the bad reasoning that got us from point A to point B, there's all kinds of ways that we can look through and see different fallacies at work in speeches and essays and oratory, what have you. So the idea is that if the teacher knows, the teacher can stop the class, have the students focus for a minute on the reasoning that was employed, and then start to give the students vocabulary for what to call things. And I want to just note that this happens, and it happens without you even trying too hard. So I've done a lot of my teaching online. I started out in a bricks and mortar school, but then I did a little bit of teaching, not for many, many years, but did some teaching online for students. And my daughter, when she was very young, she would come and she would just sit with a book and she'd sit next to my desk and she'd just be in the room because she just wanted to be near me. And this was when she was like in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and so forth. She was in fifth grade. This was several years ago now. She was in fifth grade. She was in her literature class at a school that I had sent her to. And she was in her class and the teacher was asking, what was a character trait of one of the characters in the book that they were reading? And my daughter, without me ever actually teaching her any logic, raised her hand and said that this particular character liked to commit the fallacy of sweeping generalizations all the time. And I got a note from her teacher saying, what just happened in my class? Why was your daughter saying that this character abuses sweeping generalization fallacies all the time? Have you taught her logic classes? And I said, no, it's just because she's sitting there and she's hearing it and she's hearing me give examples and identifying with either with students or through teacher training or what have you. They can pick it up because it makes sense. These things are happening and you just give them a vocabulary for it. That's one of the easiest ways to kind of build it into the classroom. So I hope that helps. It's a kind of an organic way to build it in and they can walk away with some really great tools.
Great. The second question about logic in the classroom comes from Samuel, who asks, to what extent do you use present day examples from politics and society in your logic classes, fallacies, arguments, positions? He's only taught logic for a year, but he tends to trend very carefully in this regard so as not to offend families. What do you think is the balance between engaging the present with good examples and avoiding controversial topics?
That's a great question. So I didn't teach logic. I didn't teach any classes this past year either. But there's a lot of teachers at School Academy, obviously, where we have a lot of teachers teaching. And this was huge this past year because it was presidential election. I mean, just some years it's a great year to teach logic, and then other years it is just, I feel badly for the teachers that have to teach logic, because if they want to do anything that's current or relevant to students that's happening right now, it's polarizing. And so we got a lot of questions about that. And there were teachers who I know were not being, who really weren't biased one way or the other, but if they used an example from one side, then they felt like they had to use examples from the other side. Nobody was happy about it. I mean, in some schools, if you're talking about Black Lives Matter, it's fine. If some schools, if you're talking about Black Lives Matter, you must be, I don't know, it's terrible. You really do have to be careful. So this is a great question. What I found is to let families know that you are not going to politicize your class. However, you want to be able to engage, and that means that they are going to have to trust you. So you will have to exercise some wisdom. I would say if you're relying, only on current events, bad idea. That's just going to, first of all, it's exhausting to just come up with all new ideas all the time. But it's too much. It will feel like you're politicizing your class, regardless of whether you're trying to be fair or not. It's just too much. So, but you need to communicate with your families that we are living in a world that is going to be providing us with some examples, that you are going to use your best discretion when coming up with these examples, and that they will be used from time to time. Sort of set the stage for that. Invite them into the conversation, ask them to trust you, remind them that and this is where you kind of have to teach two generations of people at the same time, the kids in your class and the parents. You will have to remind them that just because you might even identify that an argument is constructed poorly and it's built on bad arguments, a bad construction, it doesn't mean that the conclusion is wrong or false. We have to distinguish those two things. Fallacy and false are not the same thing. Fallacy has to do with a poorly constructed argument. False has to do with something not being true, right? Not being accurate and true. You can identify a poorly constructed argument while still acknowledging that somehow they sort of fumbled their way towards a true conclusion in some way. So families have to be ready to accept that kind of information, and that might require a conversation. At the heart of it, though, it's important to remind them that they don't want their kids to just be out there, saying all sorts of true things, but have their organization and their arguments terribly constructed. Ideally, they're going to have strong arguments and true conclusions, and you're only seeking to help them do that in the process. You're not trying to be politicized. So it really does come down to educating families, but you will have to navigate that with a lot of wisdom for sure.
All right, we'll roll through two more questions here. The first comes from Katie, simply looking for a recommendation for combining logic and formal science. Do you have any suggestions for where she could look, or any particular books, guides for combining logic and formal science?
Yes. And this is just because I've been talking for a while. John's book, not From Wonder to Mastery, but
Science for Every Teacher.
Science for Every Teacher. Can we get back to her? Because if I could just do a quick look on the website, I might find it. His book on what is that called? It was, oh goodness, I know, dead air, not anybody's favorite thing. Physics, biology, physical science, physics, biology, nature. I don't see all of his.
How to teach science.
So your students learn science? I think that might actually be it.
That's the one that From Wonder to Mastery.
Oh, is that the one that replaced?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the one. Read that book. That he does a fantastic job of blending logic into formal science classes. And yes, that's where I would recommend it. It's masterful. And his courses on Classical U, out of the ballpark, home runs. People say that it just changes how they want to think about science altogether when they watch his courses. So I can't stress that enough. John's courses on Classical U are fantastic.
Thanks, Joelle. And then Samuel also asked about symbolic logic. You touched on it and mentioned as the last stage of the logic sequence. What is the inherent value of it? Is it necessary?
Yes. Well, I should say, remember how I referenced that, we teach students how to, write papers in third grade, and then we don't really address writing. We hope that they're getting better at it. They're like longer and more, but it's basically the same thing from third grade all the way up through 10th grade or so. And then they take rhetoric, and we have to teach them how to write in a different way for the next stage of their lives. Logic is the same thing. I think we have this misnomer that you're going to give them all of the tools that they're ever going to need in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and then they've done logic and they're good. They're always going to have experienced it, though, as a middle schooler. they're going to need to take logic again when they get older. And depending on where they're going and what the Lord is calling them to and what that path looks like, it very well may be that they need more of that kind of symbolic logic as they get older, and depending on where they're headed. It might be that that's not something that they do need. We have to also sort of separate the fact that there was Aristotelian logic that was really aimed at pointing people to rhetoric, which is part of it being a good citizen and being able to think, and that idea of inward, upward, and outward. That's the tool that logic is used for. When you get past some of those initial introductory courses and you get past that, now we're getting into logic as its own discipline, and not necessarily logic as the core for the rest of understanding, whether it's the ethical, theoretical, or mechanical arts. So logic we might be equivocating on what we mean by logic. It could be the core piece of the trivium, the queen of the sciences, and then at a certain point it becomes its own discipline. And so you just have to decide if you're going to keep heading in that discipline, or if you're going to go into other disciplines where the logic as the philosophical piece of it is really enough. I hope I'm sort of answering that correctly or well enough.
I think that this is a perfect time for me to say, if your question was not answered today, I know there's a few I didn't get to, or if you wanted a little bit more explanation, you wanted to dig a little deeper into a particular question or topic, we are not disappearing forever. We would love to help you and continue to answer your questions. I'm going to include an email address that you can contact us at. And we'll make sure a member of our team responds and is able to help you out, whether you're representing a school, co-op, or homeschool parent. That email address is info@classicalsubjects.com. And I just dropped it into the chat box if you want to take note of that, save that, and then contact us. Even if you think of a question after the fact, or you're watching this recording later, even a year or two from now, feel free to contact us with your questions, because we want to make sure this is done properly. We want to make sure this is taught right. So we're here to help you as much as possible. On that note, I'm going to quickly, because it's 3:20, I'm going to quickly share a few links with everyone. I hope that these are helpful as well. So I'm going to do a little screen sharing on my end here. You should see our homepage at the moment, classicalacademicpress.com. From here, I'm just going to navigate, show you how you can access our logic curriculum, our logic options. You heard Jolie mention a few of them: art of argument, discovery of deduction, as well as the argument builder and everyday debate and discussion. In terms of navigating and sequencing those books, I'm going to show you a helpful blog post that Joelle wrote recently, that you can also find on our site. But in terms of reading more about the books themselves or purchasing the books, if you go to subjects and click on logic, you can access all of our logic content right here. And you can also explore by product lines by clicking the resources drop down, clicking on product lines, and you'll find all 4 logic series: the art of argument, discovery of deduction, argument builder, and everyday debate and discussion right here. Now, you may be thinking, I need a helpful snapshot to understand each of these 4 series, and that can be found by visiting our education blog. Quick link is up here. I'll also drop a link into the chat box. On the second page, now we have an article entitled Understanding the Classical Academic Press Logic and Rhetoric Sequence. That's this article right here, and it provides a snapshot of our 4 logic series that I just mentioned, as well as our rhetoric series beginning in 10th grade. Joelle, anything you want to add on that quickly before I move to next link?
Um, no, other than to say, I think a lot of folks think, well, oh gosh, well then I have to start in seventh grade. But if my kid is, coming in ninth grade or 10th grade, what do I do? And I think we address it in here, but if not, we do have a good answer for it as well, which they could email in. It's never too late to start. Absolutely never. You might not be able to get absolutely everything in, but remember, there's education past 12th grade too. So we just need to get them started on the path. So email in if you don't find the answer that you need here, but it's never too late to start, not for students, not for adults.
Thank you. Perfectly said. On our YouTube channel, head to YouTube, Classical Academic Press. We have a playlist entitled Classical Academic Press Webinars. If you visit that playlist, you'll see a number of webinars. There's me a couple weeks ago. But one I wanted to point out is one of Joelle's old webinars, and it is Get to Know Logic and Rhetoric right here. She's not going to want me to play this, but I want to show it to you. Anyways, you can find it right here on our webinar playlist, Get to Know Logic and Rhetoric. That is also accessible through our website, and it's an incredibly helpful resource for understanding the sequence. Finally, Classical U is mentioned, classicalu.com. Clicking on Math and Logic under the course finder right here. Course finder, Math and Logic will bring up those 3 logic courses that we talked about before. And on each of these 3 courses, you can find preview lessons, at least one preview lesson. I think a few courses actually have multiple preview lessons as well. And finally, we talked about a good bit about great books and good resources for all ages today. This is a kind of a comprehensive list of Classical Academic Press has put together for K through 12 and a few adult resources as well. It's called the Classical Reader. There's a print version of the Classical Reader, but this is our very accessible web version, classicalreader.com. And I'll put a link to this in the chat box as well as a follow-up email that you'll be receiving. Anything to note about the Classical Reader or Classical U, Joelle? Anything you'd like to add?
There's the Classical Reader. I've gotten them for every niece and nephew that I have, and lots of other friends as well. I even got one for Anna's entire class one year and gave them out at Christmas time. But in there's all of the different books, and there's great resources, biographies, historical fiction, just everything you can think of. In the back, there's also a section that Christine Perrin wrote on poetry, and making sure that that you're not neglecting poetry, which is wonderful. And then I wrote a piece in the back of that book as well that has to do with there was one year I did a survey of a number of the colleges that are really great liberal arts colleges, and asked them, what do you want your kid, like your incoming freshmen, to have read? And I gave them a survey and got the results back from them. And then I wrote up a few page article about what the colleges were really looking for incoming freshmen to have had. And that resource has been helpful to a lot of families too, when they're kind of trying to figure out what of everything we can read. Lewis talks about that as well in his essay, Our English Syllabus, that the life is just too short. There's so much to learn. There's no way you can read it all. So you have to kind of pick in some cases. So that's in there too.
We try to help you as much as possible with that, but it is difficult. Last thing I'll mention is that, yes, you will be receiving a recording to this webinar. It's going to be distributed first to all registrants. It'll also be publicly accessible on YouTube. That email will be sent out early next week on Monday or Tuesday of next week, so you can look for it. When you receive your email, you'll receive a prompt for a logic and rhetoric sale that we'll be doing. You'll be able to purchase any of our logic and rhetoric texts, including the ones you've heard about today, for 20% off. That'll be a flash sale. It's only going to be 3 days long. But if you look on our social media accounts or via the email you'll receive, you'll get all the information about that. And that sale is coming up next week. So check your email for the recording, for links that we've mentioned today, including links to Joelle's books that she mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, because those are heavily sought after, as well as information about that sale. And any closing comments from you, Joelle, before we wrap up shop today and
Only a big thank you for coming,
Yeah.
and that I was excited to see so many of you that are interested in logic. It does my heart good to see that everybody's excited about logic. That's wonderful.
We do not fail to get incredible questions in our webinars, and this was certainly no exception. And there were some amazing questions today. So thank you all for your participation and for your love, for your classrooms, for your children or your students, for your families, and for investing in them and allowing us to partake in that investment both today and through our books and other resources. So God bless you. Have an incredible weekend. Our next webinar is coming up about a week from today. It's by Dr. Christopher Perrin, and it'll be a Latin feature webinar, 10 reasons to study Latin. So look out for information on that as well. So be blessed and have a great weekend. Goodbye, everyone.